So our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Jacquie Rand, and she assures me that the ink is now dry on her presentation. She's been working very hard at it. Professor Rand graduated from Melbourne University in 1975 and worked in practice for 8 years before doing a residency and doctorate at the Ontario Veterinary College, Canada, followed by 3 years as a senior registrar at the University of Zurich, Switzerland. Professor Rand was appointed Professor of Companion Animal Health in the School of Veterinary Science in 2001 at the University of Queensland, Australia. She has published over 100 journal articles, authored many book chapters, and is editor of 3 books. Currently, she's involved in research programs in diabetes and obesity and in shelter medicine aimed at preventing unwanted and problem pets. Would you please welcome Dr. Jacquie Rand?
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. And the reason it went right down to the wire, it is so hard to cut a 1-hour talk down to 30 minutes. So I've left quite a lot out, and I hope some of this will come up in the discussion because some of the things I've left out is important. So this is data. This is the best comprehensive data that we've got from Australia. It's 2012, 2013. And if you see here, of the 200,000 dogs that come into Australian animal welfare agencies and council pounds, and some of this is we have also done some extrapolations here. About 19% of the dogs are rehomed, and 26% of the cats. Similar transfer rates, but the thing that differentiates them is reclaimed. So nearly 50% of the dogs were reclaimed by the original owner. Unfortunately, across Australia, it's only about 4.5% of cats, which has the ultimate end result that about 21% of dogs were euthanised, but 56% of cats, more than double. So how big's the problem? We estimate, on average, 7 cats enter shelters and pounds around Australia per every 1,000 residents. We have about 3 to 7 deaths per 1,000 human population, resulting in over 80,000 cats being euthanased annually in Australia for a human population just under 24 million. And it costs shelters and pounds over $250 million each year to manage this problem. So how do we best respond to a situation that's responsible for so many deaths annually? So I've come up with 9 strategies to save lives. And these aren't in any particular order, and you could argue which one might be best, and I think it will differ. But I do feel the first strategy is one that would make a huge difference. And I'd like you to remember this, and in fact, Jan had a much better slide this morning, and I want to get that slide from you, which shows how closely euthanasia tracks intake. And Jan, as I said, Jan's slide was even better because it had dips that so closely mirrored euthanasia. And this statement here, that the drop in shelter euthanasia rates over the past 30 years has been produced almost exclusively by a decline in shelter intake rates. Now, it's important to realise that because the most powerful thing you can do is stop animals coming into your shelters and pounds. My first strategy is transparency. And let's look at what the transparency is in Australia at the moment. Only the RSPCA and the Lost Dogs Home have current annual data at the national and state level that's easy to find. Of the councils, the Victorian government is best. On every council website you can find an animal management plan with their statistics, but you have to go to over 70 websites to find that. New South Wales has combined council data for the whole of the state available from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, but you can't get individual performance for any council that you're interested in. South Australia has combined data for councils and animal welfare agencies on the South Australian Dog and Cat Management Board website, but you can't get individual data for even a breakdown between councils and animal welfare agencies because of confidentiality agreements between them. And there's no euthanasia stats up there. Western Australia, Queensland, Northern Territory, ACT and Tasmania have no public data. So you can go to each council and ask them for the data. Some will give it to you, most won't. And then you can use freedom from information and go to well over, it's probably close to 300 councils in Australia to try and get that data. So it's obviously extremely time consuming and really not very feasible. So why would I think transparency would make a difference? How as a community do you know where you want to be if you don't know where you currently are or where you were? And how do you estimate the resources needed and where they need to be directed? But secondly, which is even more powerful, is the power of people to change. Now, it's painful, but there's many instances both in North America and Australia where massive change has occurred, where the community have said, enough's enough. We don't want this. We don't want 80, 90% of cats being killed. We don't want every second dog being killed. And so I think that, for me, is my number one strategy. So what should we have? I would advocate that we have mandated dog and cat management plans on every council website, which includes key data with uniform definitions. And that would include reclaim, rehome, intake, transfers, euthanized, foster and care. And what functions are outsourced and to whom they're outsourced. So is it the whole the whole pound activity? Is it just after the minimum holding phase? What is actually outsourced? There should also be mandated transparency for animal welfare agencies. And at the state government level, I think there should be centralised state government data for both individual agencies and individual councils, so you can go and look up your council and how that compares with others. And there should be also collated statistics for the whole state, which doesn't include double counting. And double counting is a huge issue in trying to estimate really what's happening in Australia. My second strategy, mandated anti-discrimination laws against owned pets in rental or owned accommodation. And it was great to hear Betsy speaking this morning about those initiatives. So what are the facts? When we analysed the data from 191,000 cats coming into RSPCA shelters around Australia between 2006 and 2010, people were telling them that 36% of people were surrendering their adult cat because of accommodation problems. Now, they could only give one problem, and as we know, it's often more complex as not just one problem, but at least 36% were saying that was an issue. So we estimated, based on that data, about 9,000 adult cats, about 2,000 kittens were homeless to the RSPCA every year. And if we extrapolated that to other animal welfare agencies in pounds, it was about 30 to 40,000 cats coming into shelters and pounds each year because of this. And based on that national data statistics that over half die, they half die because they've been homeless. So mandating against pet discrimination in rental and owned accommodation. A lot of people don't realise, and I'm not sure whether this is in the States, but even if you own your own apartment in the complex, the body corporate as a whole can vote that you don't have a cat or a dog. And not only that, if you move in and they do allow it, they can vote. If you don't look at the fine print, they can vote at another time so you can't have it. It's like saying to people, well, we've changed your mind. You can't have your kid any longer. You've got to find another home for your child. And because we know for many people, their pet's like their child. So it has to change. My third strategy is spay-neuter. Again, this is data from the RSPCA of those 191,000 cats, but just over half were kittens. Oops. So, and if you look at the adult cats there, about half are owned and half are stray. Of the kittens, about 40% are owned and about 60% are stray. And so clearly, spay-neuter strategies that are targeted for owned cats will be ineffective for strays, and that's more than 60% of the kittens coming into shelters. And the data from several surveys in Australia show that most adult cats are actually desexed. And in Western Australia, it was quite high. It was above 94 and 97% in 2 surveys. But that was for cats over 2 years of age. And in fact, the data from both America and here show that between 30 and 70% of cats are not sterilised before 6 to 12 months of age. And in fact, the Western Australia study showed that 50% of cats that were coming for discounted microchipping were not desexed before 2 years of age. And again, data from Australia and North America shows between 12 and 20% of those cats, so those owned cats, will have a litter of kittens before they're actually desexed. So clearly we have to reduce that spay delay with a message that's not good for the cat, not good for the kids to see the cycle of life when those kittens get taken down to the pound 6 weeks later. That's not the best way to do that. It's not too young, and you do need to get around to it. And also to get the message out there, and coming from the veterinary profession, I think we're quite guilty of that, not spreading the information that cats that are desexed before 5 months of age statistically were shown to have better behaviour and better health than those that had desexing delayed till after 5 months of age. And we know the postcodes for those large animal welfare agencies that are collecting good data. You know the problem postcodes where the cats are coming into from and being killed. So what's best? Mandated, spay-neuter? What's the evidence? Again, from that 191,000 cats, when we looked at desexing between the states, the Australian Capital Territory has had mandated desexing of all dogs and cats by 6 months of age for quite some time. And in fact, they had the lowest desexing rate of kittens coming into shelters. They did have the highest adult rate. So 81% of adult cats of known desex status coming into the RSPCA were desexed. So it suggests that people do get their cats desexed, but it's often too late to prevent a litter. So if it was mandated, I think it needs to be by 4 months of age. Why? 1, cats can be pregnant by 4 months of age. But 2, and I think this is more important, it encourages vaccinate, vaccinate. See Mary on the way out to make an appointment in 2 weeks' time for your cat to be desexed, rather than say, well, call us in 2 months' time or so and have the cat desexed. People just don't get around to it. But we don't say to people, well, would you like to come back for the second vaccination? So why are we saying to people, giving them the option of coming back for that desexing? It should be part of the initial health program for cats. Vaccinate, vaccinate, desex. It keeps them healthier, has better behaviour. The problem is most vets are not trained in early age desexing. We are not graduating the 700 graduates each year with hands-on skills. And in fact, we've just completed a survey of teaching staff across Australia and New Zealand. And what do you find? Most teaching staff are not advocating early age desexing to their students, and they're recommending the standard spay age of 5 to 6 months of age. The other problem is to have students graduate with hands-on skills of early age desexing. It requires higher level skills, which takes another week of surgery training. And with vet schools losing a lot of money, our school's losing over $6 million this year, we can't afford that extra week of training. So what we have to have are shelters partnering with veterinary schools to provide that training. And there are some excellent examples. At UQ, we are partnered with the RSPCA. We just need that extra week of training. I think the Lost Dogs Home in Melbourne is partnering with the Melbourne University. So I'd encourage you from the animal welfare agencies to be having those conversations with veterinary schools. So, what about the 60% of kittens that are stray kittens? What can we do about those? There was a telephone survey in Victoria which found that 33% of phone respondents owned a cat, but 22% fed a cat. It wasn't their own, it wasn't the neighbours. And in fact, this is amazingly consistent across the world. In South Australia, 27% of people fed a cat that they didn't perceive their own. In USA, 25% of households. In Ireland, it was 11%, but that's what cat ownership is. And I truly believe this behaviour of feeding a cat you don't perceive you own has probably been around as long as prostitution and is probably as difficult to stop. And it's been estimated that that population of cats that are living around people, around industrial sites where people are, around schools, around hospitals, around communities, is equal to about two-thirds of the owned cat population. But data from Victoria showed that only 1 in 5 were actually desexed. And so probably that 45 to 50% of kittens and cats that come into shelters that are stray or unowned but are not feral are probably coming from that semi-owned population where people feed them and they don't perceive they own them, but they're having a very significant effect on providing nutrition for reproduction and being a source of kittens and cats. So strategies for people who feed a cat but don't perceive ownership. We need effective social marketing messages to change that behaviour. And it's difficult when you look at why people do it. Some people say, I like the thrill of feeding something that's free living. How are you going to convince them to spay and neuter it? And we need to provide opportunities. And data from the US shows that people who don't perceive they own the cat won't pay more than $20 to have it desexed. And what we've been hearing from here, that a free desexing has higher uptake than any fee. We know when the kittens are coming into shelters, and this is RSPCA data across Australia, and it's remarkably constant. So we know when that kitten tsunami is going to start, and so this is when we need to be starting this desexing blitz, when the kittens from this year will mature and produce kittens next year. We have to stop them here. And this is often the quieter time for veterinary practices too. We know the postcodes where the problems are occurring. So I think that one of the strategies needs to be low or no cost desexing, targeted to areas of high intake and euthanasia to stop last summer's kittens producing next summer's kittens. And we've been hearing some great success stories here. This is just one that was in the literature where there was a 50% drop in shelter admissions using a spay-neuter voucher program, and the net savings to the county was $1.4 million over 4 years. And this was some data that Blacktown actually got where they subsidised dog desexing by 50%, and they had Deloitte's look at the value to them, and they estimated that $100 spent in this subsidised desexing saved $200 in the pound, and I wish they'd publish it. Is anyone here from Blacktown? Please publish your data. You know, it needs to be out there to show people that it makes a difference. Come and talk to me afterwards. So, my fourth strategy, confining cats to their property. So this is again from this data, which was Corinne Albertson's PhD thesis. 35% of adult stray cats coming into RSPCAs that we knew of the desex status were actually desexed, and 42% of cats coming into RSPCAs through council admissions were also sterilised. So it's likely many of these cats are own cats that have wandered. And data from North America has shown that people delay looking for cats that are lost compared to dogs. And if you talk to people in Australia, I'm sure that's the same. But this was reported that the average time to call or visit an animal control agency was 1 day for dogs and 3 days for cats. But in many of our states, the minimum holding period before you can kill a cat is 3 days. So we clearly need to have strategies which will keep owned cats on their property. And I am quite an advocate of cat-proof housing. My research has been in diabetes and obesity, and certainly keeping cats indoors keeps them safe, but statistically diabetes, obesity, feline lower urinary tract disease is more common in overweight sedentary cats. So I do like to see them outside exercising, and there are a number of ways you can keep them safe. Some of these aviary type constructions I have welfare concerns about. I know the welfare agencies have concerns about these electronic collars. However, there's been some research done, I think at Nottingham, looking at the welfare, and I'm hoping that's going to have some published results fairly soon, which will have some definitive, I've got more. So whether it should be subsidised or just mandatory, we don't know. So identification. 15% of cat owners lose their pet once in a 5-year period. 41% of lost cats were indoor only. 64% of owned cats are microchipped in Australia, but this was data from last year from the RSPCA Queensland. Only 9% of stray cats entering the shelter were microchipped. But 37% of those microchipped cats had data problems. 47% were registered to the previous owner. 29% or phone numbers were incorrect or disconnected. And 14% weren't registered. But it's compulsory to do that within 7 days. And when you looked at what happened to those cats, 61% that had no data problems were reclaimed. 33% that had data problems were reclaimed, and if they had no microchip, only 5% were reclaimed. There's no legal requirement for a previous owner or organisation to transfer ownership to the new owner. So, should we mandate that? Should it be like car ownership, where both the new owner and the previous owner fill out the paperwork, but it's the new owner who has the onus to register it, but the old owner does know who it went to? Will it be effective? Well, probably if we mandate it and it's the responsibility of the previous owner, organisations and breeders will do that, but unlikely very effective for individuals. So what would be effective? I would really like to see in Australia a microchip awareness month. It would be great if the RSPCA, being a national organisation, took initiative here, but really had a coalition, a collaboration with all the welfare agencies and the government councils so that they offer low-cost community microchipping. You can check your pet's microchip details, you can update them there on the spot, you can go down to the local park on Saturday morning where they've got a booth. It's easy, it's accessible. And we need to increase the ease at which people can update their details. Most people don't know, they don't aware how many databases there are or even how to start to look for it, and they don't know the number of their pet anyway. So we need to fix some of those problems. Strategy 6, And this is, I've changed the wording, it was education before, but talking to Betsy, I've changed it to sharing information with pound and shelter managers. And this is such a great forum to do that. But the facts are we've been looking at council pound data in Victoria, and there are some councils that kill 80 to 90% of cats still. And other shelters in Australia, the best I've heard is a Cat Haven so far of the medium-sized shelters, medium or large, is 11% of cats, so well done there. But obviously, what we're hearing here at this conference, that introducing a range of strategies to reduce intake and increase live release has a marked impact. And I just took one from the literature. Jacksonville Animal Control used to receive 34,000 animals a year, dogs and cats, and killed 23,000. Pretty standard, 2/3 if you look at dogs and cats together. 10 years later, after they changed their name to Jacksonville Animal Care and Protection, they were killing 2,000. And it's not one strategy, and it's what you're hearing here. We looked at council pounds, as I said. The intake varies between 3 and 8 residents per 1,000 population, with euthanasia rates between 20 and 90%. And we're actually doing a survey at the moment. If you're a council in Victoria, we'd love to hear from you, because we're not going to report individual data, but what we want to know is what the ones that have got great results are doing and are not being done by the others, so we can help you and disseminate that information. So if you come from Victorian Council, please talk to me. So, and we're hearing terrific examples here, and there's not time to go through all of them, but working with animal rescue groups is one of the strategies that's coming out of that survey that differentiates the ones that have got great save rates and the ones that don't. Fostering and transferring. And we were hearing earlier in the week a terrific talk on the don't take more cats in, the capacity for care. Don't take in more you can care for, engaging people to help find solutions for the pet they want to surrender, but also those semi-owned cats. Sarah Zito is going to be speaking tomorrow, and many people that are surrendering a stray, unowned cat think it's the right thing to do. And many of them, 40%, have been feeding it for more than a month. They care for it, so you can engage them in finding a solution for it. Make it easier to adopt. Keeping animals in our homes, and we've been hearing some great stuff this morning about that. And improve advertising and marketing. We should be advertising. You're the preferred source to get animals from. They're behaviour tested, they're health tested, they're microchipped, they're desexed. What other sources of animals have all those sorts of guarantees, and usually you can return them within 30 days and get your money back? I mean, where else do you get that sort of guarantee? We need to be seen as the very best source of animals. Strategy 6, return to field. And saving adult stray cats is an issue, and it's a heterogeneous population. They're lost and abandoned owned cats, they're semi-owned cats, and they're feral cats. And like in many places, I think Australia and New Zealand, really cats have this evil wildlife killer reputation. It's been shown that cats are 3 times more likely to disappear from a household than dogs are, but 66% of lost cats are found because they returned home, and only 7% of lost cats were found via a call or visit to the shelter. And so cats were statistically 13 times more likely to return by non-shelter than shelter means. And just remember that statistic for Australia, 4.5% of cats are reclaimed from shelters and pounds. So if we look at feral adult cats, there's actually data that shows it's location dependent, and it may not be beneficial to remove the cat from that location. But if we decided to remove all cats from Australia from the environment, it would cost us more than our national GDP. So clearly, cats are not a higher priority than schools, education, roads. So it's not feasible. In Macquarie Island, they showed that just removing cats actually had a worse impact on the environment. So we need to identify really areas with high value wildlife that's at risk of disappearing. We need to fence them and take all the introduced species out. We can't just take cats out. When we looked at the RSPCA data, only 10% of cats coming into RSPCAs around Australia were classed as feral, and 92% of those were euthanased. So most cats are not feral coming into shelters, but 10% are, and that's a large number. So what if we only euthanised the medically untreatable, which data from North America shows as less than 1 to 2% of cats, and data from New Zealand too. Shelter, neuter, and so what if we did shelter and neuter and return within 300 metres of being found? And we've heard some great data here, and John's data from San Jose is really just inspiring. Cat and kitten intake decreased 29%, euthanasia decreased from 70 to 23%, 96% healthy feral cats saved, decline in upper respiratory rate, and surprisingly, 20% decline in dead cat pickup off the streets. But there was no change in dog statistics at the time. They're powerful statistics. We need to get that communicated to government agencies. But it's illegal in Australia. Cats are considered a pest species. You can't release them. Why? Because of a perceived effect on wildlife. But is it justified? Cats can actually have a negative effect on wildlife, but they can have a neutral effect and they can have a positive effect depending on the location, depending on the native wildlife that's there, depending on other predators and particularly introduced species. And we shouldn't be killing them based on a welfare argument. That very nice data from Anya yesterday and data from North America shows that the majority of free-living cats are no less healthy than pet cats, and they have ideal body condition. Most of them are not obese. 50% of obese-owned cats are dead after 4 years compared to 2 out of 10 lean cats. Just had to throw that in. But there's no study in Australia from suburban areas showing a negative effect on native wildlife. There was 2 Perth studies. One looked at native bird density, passerines, and one mammal density and diversity. And they found there was no negative association between cats and density and diversity of birds and mammals. But, not surprisingly, what did impact native wildlife was density of housing and distance from bushland. We're currently doing a study, and I'm hoping I can get some of you to post this on your website. We're asking people, owners of dogs and cats, what they saw their dog and cat catch in the last 6 months. What did they catch? This is just preliminary data. Cats, not surprisingly, this is what they were brought to Australia for, they catch mice. Rats, followed by lizards, and then birds. And that's consistent with the Macquarie Island data where you've got other predators there that cats can have a positive effect on wildlife because they're keeping the rats and the mice and the rabbits down. So is it justified killing cats based on this perceived effect, particularly in suburban areas, of a effect on wildlife? And so what I'm asking here today, are there councils here that would be interested in working with their agencies to get a research project up and running where we actually track wildlife probably over about a 5-year period, and we do some controlled release, and we have controlled postcodes where we don't, and we actually get hard data about the effect on wildlife. So please come and talk to me if you're interested, and we'll be partnering with, obviously, animal welfare agencies. Strategy 8, I'm getting close. Trap, neuter and return. What's the evidence that works? In Montana, 36% decline in cat intake, 87% decline in euthanasia. But more importantly for councils, an 84% decline in cat-related complaint calls. Interesting. Texas, similar, a 90% decline in cat-related complaint calls. Kentucky, a 51% decline in cat intake in targeted areas, and only a 20% decline over that whole service area. So again, fairly convincing statistics. So we've heard great things about it here. No time to go into it. I'm going to be thrown off the podium in a moment. My last strategy, accessible and low-cost assistance with behaviour problems. And so keeping animals in their homes through behaviour counselling and pounds and shelters and vet stores is really important, I think. And I was really excited to hear about the Just for Pets initiative, where there is some ability to get some free behaviour counselling at those pet stores. But I truly believe that we need a lot more educated people in the community through TAFE courses, through vet tech courses, who are skilled at animal behaviour. We still need the really crash-hot animal behaviouralists, but some of those, by the time they do home visits, they're $200-300, and a lot of people can't afford that. They need to be accessible. And, I'd love to see it so that, and I know as a veterinarian, if the animal, the people said, it's got mouthing problems, you'd kind of just ignore that and go to the ears or talk about worming, because you knew you'd be stuck there for 10 minutes. You couldn't sell them anything, and there was a whole waiting room full of people there. But if you could say, look, just see Mary on the way out, because every week you can come down in the evening between 7:30, it starts at 7:30, pay $20, and we'll help you work through those behaviour problems. Every Tuesday we do it. So, we need options that are low cost and accessible. And this is my summary. These are my summaries. So, what if? What if every pound an animal welfare agency was transparent in their performance? Landlords could not ban pets. Shelters and pounds redirected significantly more resources into subsidised spay-neuter programs that were targeted to areas generating unwanted kittens and puppies. Oh, sorry, should have been changed to cut out the dogs, but also targeted breed of dog. Targeted for autumn and winter to stop the kitten tsunami. Supported by effective social marketing messages to overcome behaviour of people who feed cats without neutering, and this spay delay. That every pet was confined to the property, was supported by legislation and subsidies and incentives. All owned cats were microchipped and database details were current for nearly all owners. Pounds and shelters implemented best practice. Healthy adult cats unable to be rehomed and neutered and returned to the same area. Free-living cats in suburban areas are trapped, neutered and returned. Behaviour modification was easily accessible and affordable. Would we kill as many cats and kittens? Thank you.